Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. In these next episodes, we do Hebrew legitimacy and trauma. Who are the Hebrews? They're Canaanite-speaking people on the move. They'll eventually settle in a land that will get called lots of different names, and the name we'll end up calling it first is Cana. So it's a land with the Semitic-speaking peoples. The Bronze Age collapse scattered these people, so the Hebrews are one of these people on the move, and kind of the remembrance of being on the move is the Exodus story, the Moses story. There's no historical evidence that the Exodus happened, that the Hebrews were massively enslaved in Egypt. There is absolutely nothing. We've talked about this in the pyramid section. There is no connection between ancient Hebrews and the building of the pyramids. The pyramids are so old that they're probably 2,000 years old by the time we get to Moses. Like, the Hebrews just simply aren't around as a separate, distinct people when the pyramids are being built. But it's more important that the Bronze Age collapse is the remembrance of that. Is all of this stuff that's the Exodus is written much later, and it's a remembrance of this time of all of this turmoil when you're looking for a homeland. Well, everybody was looking for a homeland, and the place they will settle in is a small piece of territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. It's small compared to Mesopotamia and Egypt. It is small, and thus this is our first poor people. And I know there will be people who are like, well, compared to the Egyptians and Babylon, these are a poor people. It's not that they're not significant. It's just this is our first people who do not have a chance of taking over the world. So where they are located is east of Egypt and southwest of Babylon. Great, you're away from everybody. For a small, poor people, that is a good place to be. Away from the giant whale, killer whale, sperm whale, great white sharks of the neighborhood. Great. But there's also a danger to this. And what is that danger? Well, you're between Egypt and Babylon and Mesopotamia. If Egypt and Babylon ever get into a war, they're going to fight in your territory. You're on the other side of Sinai, which means you are the last rest stop for anyone invading Egypt, but you are also the first rest stop for anyone coming out of Egypt. You're the place. And there are, I think, like 18 major battles between Egyptian kingdoms and Mesopotamian kingdoms in the ancient world that happen in the land of Cana, Palestine. I don't know if it would be the Levant, the modern countries of Lebanon and Israel. So this is a bad place to be, and it's a good place to be. It's a dangerous place to be. Additionally, Jerusalem is not a port. And that matters because it tells us about this civilization. By not being a port, they don't have access to all the trade of the Mediterranean, to all the other peoples of the Mediterranean. Trade by ship is much easier than trade by land. And so Jerusalem lacks connections, which means there's less trade, which means, again, they're a poor people. They're okay with that, actually, because it keeps people away. It keeps them from mixing with people. They're in a place where they don't have to mix with people, and they have an economic system where they don't really have to mix with people, which is smart if you're small. Because you're surrounded by Egypt and Babylon. It's easy to get sucked into these civilizations, of which we will talk about. So Jerusalem is not a port. It lacks those connections, which means the Hebrews are going to be economically behind, technologically behind, culturally behind Mesopotamian Egypt. They just are. So what about Hebrew culture? What does this? So now that we got geography down, what about their culture? Well, it's a mix of things, and we'll talk about that. It's Mesopotamian. It's clear that it's a Semitic language. It is, to be anti-Semitic is to be anti-Jewish. But there are two Semitic languages still around. There's Hebrew and Arabic. The Egyptians did not speak a Semitic language, so they are clearly tied, and you could see this all over the Talmud, of Babylonian influences. They are Mesopotamian. They are Mesopotamian people. They are not an Egyptian people in terms of culture. They are not a Hittite people. They are a Mesopotamian cultural people with Babylonian influences. And this is especially true after 586, after the Babylonian captivity. We see it in the law. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Most of you know that not from Hammurabi, but from your Old Testament, from your church. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Temple design. They're taking ziggurats out of Babylon. They're not taking Egypt. They don't build Egyptian pyramids like the Cushites do. Their language is Mesopotamian. The stories. Noah, the Hebrew story of Noah's Ark. Noah is a character in Gilgamesh. Now, he's not when the Babylonians write it. When the Hebrews take Gilgamesh, they make it their own. They go, oh, that guy. He's one of ours. So they're not doing that to Egyptian stories. They're doing it to Babylonian stuff. The Tower of Babel is Babylon. Is a whole thing about Babylon. So there's a Mesopotamian influence all over Hebrew culture. 2, despite being culturally tied to Babylon and Mesopotamia, they have a tight political alliance with Egypt, which makes total sense. If you take a look at the map, they are right next door to Egypt. They are the first rest stop out of Egypt and the last rest stop if you want to invade Egypt. So, of course, you're going to turn to the Pharaoh and say, yo, Pharaoh, protect us, because it's in the Pharaoh's interest to protect you. Remember the Hyksos? Well, the Hyksos have to have come through. If the Hebrews had been, and if Canaan had existed, and the Hebrews had been in Canaan, the Hyksos from Mesopotamia have had to have gone through there. Now, there's an argument that the Hyksos are in fact Canaanite, or are in fact Phoenician. But they would have went through there. And there's no record of that in the Old Testament. There's not. So there's these major things that happened to Egypt. Like, they had to have gone through. So it's in the Pharaoh's interest for there to be a strong Canaanite kingdom right on the other side of his border that he's allied to. And if that happens to be the Hebrews, Pharaoh don't care. He just needs some protection. He needs a roadblock. He needs something to slow down any invasion, especially from Babylon. So it's a Mesopotamian culture, but a political alliance with Egypt. And the Hebrews, though, because they're small and they're poor, and they're surrounded by these much larger, much more successful civilizations. The Phoenicians are right to their north. The Egyptians are to their west. The Mesopotamians and Babylonians are to their northwest. And they're surrounded by other Canaanites. Well, why wouldn't you marry into these people? Why wouldn't you assimilate into these people? Why wouldn't you become Egyptian? Life in Egypt is way better. Why wouldn't you become Babylonian? And so one of the things the Hebrews do to survive as a separate culture, since they share all these other things, is to separate themselves out from other Canaanite peoples. We see this in diet. Not to eat pork. Now, why does that matter? Because people go, oh, pork is dirty. No, pork isn't dirty. Stop. That's just ridiculous. You eat pork all the time. Can you have an Italian meal without pork? You have a giant ham if you're a Catholic on Christmas. If pork was dirty, why would you eat a giant ham on the most holy of days? Makes no sense. It's not dirty. what pork was the first domesticated food in the Middle East for food. It was the first domesticated animal just for food. Sheep, you use for wool. Goats, you used for milk. Pork is food. So everybody ate pork. The Italians will eat pork. Everyone in the Middle East is eating pork. Pork was the food, the meat of urban life in the Middle East. So if you want to say you're different, if you want to say you're special, you give up pork because everybody else eats it. Notice this is something St. Paul has to change when he tries to convert Romans. He tries to convert Romans. He says, the Jewish law is to worship the Jewish God, you can't eat pork. And the Romans look at him as if he's got 4 heads and walk away. Like, this is crazy. This God is insane. I like the loaves and the fishes, but the no pork? You gotta be crazy. How am I supposed to make a sauce without any pork? And St. Paul's like, whoa, come back. He jettisons that real fast. And he jettisons the next part, circumcision. You gotta cut the bippy off your bippy. Now, for those of you who don't know what circumcision is, and that's okay that you don't because no one talked about it, let's put it this way. When a male baby is born, male human baby is born, he's got a turtleneck on his bippy. It's there probably as a protective sheath for when humans didn't wear clothes and we walked around deserts and the savannah of Africa. Probably makes total sense. Biologically, evolutionarily speaking. As a sacrifice and a covenant to the one true God, Yahweh, Hebrews are going to cut that off. It's superfluous. You don't really need it. It's nice to have, I suppose. But they cut it off. Throw it in the fire. Give it up to God. Say, we're serious. If you're going to cut the bippy off your bippy with a sharp rock, you're serious to be the chosen people. And you're taking this God seriously. I mean, this is what Abraham has to do. I mean, when Yahweh, the story is when Yahweh comes out of the desert and comes out of the desert, out of the Arabian desert, comes to Abraham on the edge of the desert and says, "Yo, Abraham, can I have a drink?" And Abraham's like, "Yeah, sure, of course. You have some water." And this God, this walking dude, says, "I'm going to drink some water." This walking dude says, "Abraham, today's your lucky day. I turn out to be a super powerful God. Not the only God. He doesn't say that. But he's the right one. I'm a super powerful God. And I got a problem. My problem is I don't have any worshipers. Nobody knows I am the super powerful God. The Egyptians have gods, and the Babylonians have gods, and here I am, I got no gods. So Abraham, I'm going to make you a deal. You have no kids." And Abraham's like, "Dude, man, I'm like 900 years old." No, he's actually probably in his 50s. He's quote unquote old, but old in the ancient world is like, you hit 50, you were ancient, man. And his wife is probably in her 40s, but you would have went through menopause earlier because people's diets were so terrible. They were so lacking in modern nutrients. So women went through menopause much earlier. In fact, I am of an age, when I was a kid, you had to have your kids by 35. By the time women hit 35, when I was a kid, doctors would tell you, if you want to have kids, you got to have them by 35. After 35, any crazy thing can happen to a woman's body. Now it's like 40, maybe even 45, but it's more like 40 now, even though they'll give recommendations of 35. But when I was a kid, and so this is 4,000 years later, And 40 is still like the upper limits of when women really should be having kids. So if Sarah is 45 years old, man, she's old. Anyway, they don't have kids. And this God says, look, you worship me, and I will give you as many descendants as there are stars. Which means Abraham doesn't live in a modern lighted city because he can actually see the stars. He goes, oh my God, there's tens of thousands of stars. I don't know how many stars you can actually see. I think it's like, I want to say it's 5,000, but that seems small. And, you know, most of the stars you see aren't actually stars. They're galaxies, but that's a whole other thing. At least I think so. But this is a history class, not an astronomy class. And so this is laughable. A God has come to Abraham and said, I'm the right God. I'm a powerful God. I'm a super powerful God. I will give you as many descendants to the stars. And he's like, dude, I have been married for 30 years. There's no way. Like, we've done this. We've been through this. Like, all right, sure. Why not? I'll worship you. And I'll get kids out of this. Sure. But here's how it ties back to the original point. This God then turns to Abraham and says, yo, Abraham, here's the thing, though. If I'm going to give you all this power, you're going to be my chosen one on earth. And your people will inherit that. They'll be my chosen people on earth. My one true people. Among all the other people on earth, they'll come first. If you're going to get that, and all your ancestors are going to get that, and your children's children's children are going to get that, you got to prove you're worth it. You got to prove you believe that you're not just like some fly-by-night, you're just going to worship whatever God comes around. You got to mean it. Abraham's like, all right, dude, no, I mean it. I'll worship you. I really will. I mean it. And this God says, no, man. You see your bippy? Gotta cut that skin off. And everyone's like, whoa, WTF, man. That's serious. And Yahweh's like, yeah, like a heart attack, man. This we're not fooling around. I'm going to make you my chosen people. You got to earn it. We're playing for keeps, man. I don't think you realize what's going on. And that's when Abraham gets serious. He's like, whoa, okay. All right. Okay. Before I didn't have to do anything. Now I got to do something. So from the very beginning, right, if you're one of the Abrahamic religions, sacrifice is part of it. Not the animal sacrifice, but yourself. You've got to sacrifice for this. And Abraham goes, all right. He calls his bluff. I'm in. I'm with you. We're going to cut the bippy off my bippy. And Yahweh says, great. I'll be back. We'll get it done. You do the bippy thingy. When I come back, I got some things to do. When I come back, we'll talk about the kids. And he takes off. And so Abraham goes to cut the bippy off his bippy. And he cannot do it, which makes total sense. You take a sharp knife or a sharp rock and you cut the bippy off your bippy. You're crazy, dude. No. And besides, they didn't have anesthesia. Like modern anesthesia. Nope. So you know who does it? His wife does it. He turns. Now, what that conversation is not recorded in the Bible, but that conversation is a major conversation because that's a love, man. That is Sarah's love. She wants to have kids too. And Abraham's like, we want to have kids? We want to have descendants? This God says he's real? And honey, I can't do this. I need your help. And she's like, I'll do it for you. Now you have to think about that relationship. You're trusting your wife to cut the bippy off your bippy, not your bippy. That is serious. And Sarah does it. Hardcore, man. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Done. She does it out of love. Love of her man, love of her husband, love of her God, love of her future children. Love. That's love. That is the love of a woman. Now that's important because that will happen to Moses. Moses will have the same situation. Moses will be walking around. This is all ties all of these stories together. Moses is walking around, having a good time, being Pharaoh's adopted son, and what happens? Angel Gabriel shows up. Angel Gabriel says, "Hey Moses, you're my man. You're who I'm looking for. I am the voice of the one true God, of the best God in the whole wide world. And turns out you're not Egyptian. You're Hebrew. And you got too much bippy on your bippy. You got to cut that sucker off." He's like, "Cut the whole thing off?" No, just the turtleneck part. And then you are going to lead the people to freedom. You're going to be the leader of your Hebrew people. You're going to be the man. And Moses is like, F that. My brother Aaron, he's the talker. No way. No. Moses don't want anything to do with this. But eventually, he will. And who'll cut the bippy off his bippy? His wife. Wife who's not even recorded. He can't do it himself. You can't do this yourself. And again, the love of a woman allows the men to do the sacrifice for their true God. Think about that. Think about that. The next time you think women aren't important in religion, think about that. These men couldn't be Abraham. They couldn't be Moses without their wives. But here's the thing about circumcision. Nobody does it. Nobody does it. It's crazy to do it. Nobody does it. So few people in the ancient, just in the world do this, that even in World War II, the Nazis used it as a way of separating Christian Germans from Jewish Germans. You're a Jew. No, I'm not. I'm a Christian. Yes, you're a Jew. We know you're a Jew. No, I'm not. I'm not. Drop your pants. Shit. Now, here's the thing. If you're an American, if you're a white boy, if you're an American white man, you're circumcised. You are almost certainly circumcised in the modern world. And that has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with hygiene. Because Americans are Anglo-Americans. We are tied to British culture. And the Victorians in the 19th century were all about hygiene and not getting icky stuff in your hoo-hoos. And so you cut it off. If you're an African-American man, you're like 85%. You are likely to be circumcised. Because you had all those white doctors in the 50s and the 60s who are like, you got to cut the baby off your baby. So if you're white or you're African-American, you are almost certainly circumcised. If you're a young man, if you're a person in my class, you're almost certainly circumcised. If you are an immigrant, you're probably not. If you are Hispanic, it depends on what kind of Hispanic you are. If you are a, first, second generation immigrant, then there's a good chance, it's about 50% or so, of you not being circumcised. If you're a Hispanic who has been in America for 400 years, like, the old Mexicans, the Texans, the old Mexicans that were in Tejas, then you're circumcised. It depends on how American you are. Basically how indoctrinated into WASP Anglo culture are you? If you're here long enough, you're circumcised. You got the bippy, cut off your bippy. Europeans? Not. Except for the British. I don't know their percentages. But they were. Muslims are a circumcised people because they follow the same rules. They're from the same God. Allah is Jehovah, is Yahweh. So the Muslims are a circumcised people. Which is problematic when it comes to Muhammad, because there's a debate. There's a literal debate on whether or not he was circumcised and when he was circumcised. There's the idea that he was born circumcised, which is kind of crazy but that shows he's the chosen prophet. There's also the one that his wife circumcises him, which would put him in line with Moses and Abraham. Makes total sense. There's also the idea that he was never circumcised. Remember, he's an Arab. He's a polytheistic Arab before he becomes a monotheist. So he wouldn't have been circumcised first, but he would have when he converted, kind of like Abraham. And so, but then there's the idea that, well, we don't really know if he ever really did, because that's still kind of a Hebrew thing. So, because the Christians aren't. The Christians screw that all up. The Christians aren't circumcised people. The Romans are like, yeah, cut the bibby off a bibby. Yeah, no, that ain't happening. No way. So we are eating our pork and we're keeping our bibbies intact. So you want us to like Jesus, deal with it. And St. Paul is like, yeah, that's not a problem. Gotta love, you just have to love Jesus. So I know this is a long discussion on circumcision, but people don't talk about the ho-hos and the he-he's very much, and we should, because it's a long history of rules about what you do with your bippies. Finally, there's religion. The thing that separates them out from religion is they've got this Yahweh, which is the most important God among many. Now, here's the thing. This is the thing. There's a process from polytheism, Abraham, before Yahweh shows up. Then there's monolatry, Molatry, which is Moses, which is the Ten Commandments. There's the right God among many gods. Think of the first commandment of the Ten Commandments, right? I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, today, I've been in catechism, and they're like, that means money. No, it didn't. No, it freaking didn't. I'm sorry. They lived in a world with lots of gods. When you're in Egypt, there's Egyptian gods. When you're in Babylon, there's Babylonian gods. And those gods had power. What Moses is saying, what Yahweh is saying to Moses is, I'm the man. Worship only me. Don't get caught up with all these Babylonian and Phoenician and Egyptian gods. As sexy as they are, I'm your guy. Or girl. Or it. Because we're going to talk about monotheism. Now, as time goes on, we're going to get monotheism. That there is only one God that exists in the whole wide world. But that's not Moses. That's not the start. In fact, that's not the kingdom of Israel. Those are the prophets, and the prophets will eventually win. But early on, man, you'd be silly to say there's only one God. No one would respect that. They're like, dude, it is known that in Babylon you have Babylonian gods, because you are far away from the Hebrew temple. You are, 1,000 miles away? Like, how is that God from that temple going to help you? Gods were regional, and gods had power. And so you respected them. You did not necessarily have to worship them, but you respected them when you're in their hometown. So these three major things, diet, circumcision, and religion, all separate the Canaanites, all separate the Hebrews out of other Canaanite peoples, much less from the Hebrews, the Phoenicians, and the Egyptians, all of whom are richer, smarter, and more advanced than they are. So let's talk about monotheism, this process. So we have polytheism. We've talked about that. We've talked a little bit about monolatry, one God among many. They're the right God. Yahweh is the right God, but the other gods do exist, and if other people want to worship them, fine. Silly Babylonians and their Babylonian gods. Monotheism is different, and monotheism is what the prophets, the Ezekiels and the Isaiahs, are going to be preaching, the Daniels, right? Monotheism is there is only one God. All the others are figments of your imagination. They don't exist. And the Christians will do this. I don't think the Hebrews do it, but I know the Christians do it. They're demons and devils. And if you think about the different names for demons and devils, they all come out of other gods. I mean, hell is literally Helga is a god god of the underworld in Scandinavian. in Norse mythology. You have Bel and you have Baal, Phoenician gods. You have Mammon, Phoenician god. Now, they're all, you open up your manual of the planes from Dungeons and Dragons and you read the names of the devils. They're all gods from Mesopotamian Babylonian people. So monotheism was a process, and it wasn't even all that successful at times in Hebrew society, and we're going to talk about that. It's not like the Hebrews just flipped the switch and everyone became monotheist. There's a long time where they're like, it's kind of silly. There's other gods certainly do exist. And if our God ain't remember the contract, if our God ain't helping us, maybe we should flirt with other gods. So, what does monotheism mean? Monotheism means there's one real God, one God. What kind of God is this? Now, this is a different kind of God. It's a transcendental God. It is not human. So I have used, and I'm sorry, I've used the pronoun he. And I don't really mean that because it's not right. It's tradition to use he, but it's not true. Yahweh has no body, has no gender, has no sex. Yahweh is a form, kind of a platonic form in a way. In fact, actually, yes, a platonic form. As I'm doing it now, platonic forms are perfect forms. Yahweh is the perfect form. So Yahweh can be whatever Yahweh wants to be. Yahweh wants to be a man, he's a man. Yahweh wants to be a woman, she's a woman. Yahweh wants to be a cocker spaniel, getting belly rubs. Yahweh is a cocker spaniel getting belly rubs. I mean, it's that easy. Out of tradition, we made God a man. Why? Because men ran ancient societies, so they wouldn't have made it a woman. That's just, if there's only one God, it's not going to make it a woman. And so they made it a man. And in their own image, though I think it's Plato who says, I don't think it's Aristotle, I think it's Plato who says, if horses had gods, a god would look like a horse. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, we make gods look like us, but we can't actually understand those gods. So, this is a transcendental God. This is not a human God, which makes this God better than us. Better than people. Unlike the Greek gods, unlike the Egyptian gods, unlike the Babylonian gods, who are good and bad because they're people, but big. This God is not a person. So this God is more moral than people are. This God does not have sex. This God does not have drugs. This God does not drink. This God is as pure goes, and it is all-powerful, omnipotent, omni, P-O-T-E-N-T. It can do anything, literally anything, and is omniscient. Omni, O-M-N-I, scient. S-C-I-E-N-T, meaning knows everything that was, knows everything that is, knows everything that will be. So this God knows what socks you're putting on tomorrow, because this God knows everything, which means this God is not knowable and not understandable, which is very, very different from polytheism. In polytheism, you understood your gods, and so you can make a contract with those gods, and those gods would help you or hurt you based upon that contract. You can't make a contract with this God. You can try, and lots of people do. They pray, and they're like, dear God, if you help me get an A on this test, I promise I will, and that's a contract. This God doesn't care. This God is not bound by contracts. This God is beyond contracts. So you're taking your polytheism, because in the end, people still are polytheists, and you're applying it to a monotheistic thought, a God. You're taking polytheistic thought, applying it to a monotheistic God who cannot be bought, who's more moral. There is nothing you can do that you can hand over to this God to make this God act. Because this God has already acted. Because it knows what will be. So your prayers are already said and already fulfilled or not by the time you even think to think them. Does that make sense? Because this God lives like Janet in The Good Place on all levels, in all times, at the same time. The point of this is that this God is better than you. Which means you, even as a chosen person, are a constant disappointment. And how do I know you're a constant disappointment? Because we have the flood, which murders 99.99% of all people. Where even Yahweh says, whoa, that was a little too far. That's a little too far. You know, there's the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? There's Jesus saying, he without sin cast the first stone, and nobody does. And neither does he. Here's the wonderful part about the Jesus part. Jesus doesn't cast the first stone either. Which is telling you what? He's telling you, yeah, I sin too. And you go, wait, Jesus can't sin. Oh yeah, Jesus can, because Jesus is all man and all God. His all man part does wrong stuff, gets angry, says curse words, farts. Because he is human. And humans F up, man. They fork it up big time. They know they shouldn't, but they do. And so this God is unknowable, not understandable. In fact, very few humans actually see this God in all of this God's glory. It's only a handful. Maybe David? I don't even know if David does. Moses does. Abraham does. And I'm not talking burning bush, or even, I'm talking full glory of the Adam does, obviously, but Adam's in Eden, it doesn't count. It's not real. I mean, it's real, but it's not the world. So the rules don't apply. In several episodes, Homer Simpson does, right? But he's always in either a dream world or in heaven, or he's in God's domain, not in like his kitchen. But Abraham does, Moses does, a couple other people do. And this is all the glory that is Yahweh. And they all are affected by it. They all come back like Odysseus from the land of the dead with gray eyes. They come back older. They come back affected. They never come back better having seen God. Why? Because you're human. You can't understand. You can't comprehend. So when God comes to Job, when Job's like, you have done these things to me, I want to know why, and God comes down to him, he comes as a whirlwind, he comes as a hurricane, he comes as a tornado. He doesn't come as God, which would have been too impressive, too awe-inspiring. The proper way to respond when you meet God is the ending of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where your head either melts or explodes, one or the other, because you simply can't handle it. Because it's more beautiful and more awful than anything else that can exist. Your mind simply cannot, in an H.G. Lovecraft kind of way, where H.G. Lovecraft has these things called the old gods, and when humans see them, they all go, he just quotes it, and then he went mad. He doesn't even describe like what that going mad means. He just, and then he went mad. And it's like, because you can't comprehend what an old god looks like. All right, so in monotheism, this one God controls everything. Which means this one God cares about everything. Which means there are rules about everything. And thus there is punishments for everything. There are rules about cutting your hair, not cutting your hair. There are 40 or so rules about having sex. There are 40 or so rules about what food to eat, how and when. There's rules about debt. There's rules about forgiveness of debt. There's rules about changing the rules, i.e. you don't get to change them. Why don't you get to change the rules? Because God made them, and God doesn't fork it up. The rules God makes are the rules. That's going to be a problem. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this is different. Notice this is different from all the polytheism. Polytheism is a God controls rain, a very limited thing, which means the God cares about sacrifice, that contract. The polytheistic gods have rules about nothing. Just don't F with their sacrifice, you're cool. And punishment, it depends on how the gods feel. If they get drunk and they want to destroy stuff, they do. Because they're not nice. Monotheistic God is different. It has rules about everything. It cares about everything. It controls everything, and thus it punishes you for everything. Zeus doesn't care if you cheat on your wife. Yahweh does. Zeus doesn't care if you cheat on your taxes. Yahweh does. Zeus doesn't care if you beat your kids. Yahweh actually has 12 rules about it. What is the advantages of monotheism? Yahweh loves you. This one true God is your homeboy. You have an emotional connection. See Exodus every time, and Yahweh gets mad at the people. But they complain to him, and he's like, oh, will you people shut up? But then Moses is like, dude, can you help me out? We need some food. And Yahweh's like, yeah, all right, I'll make manna come from heaven. Because this God loves you. Yes, you're a screw up. Yes, you F it up and you're selfish and you're a terrible person. And the creator of the universe still thinks you, insignificant nothing you, is the chosen person. You are the best people in the whole wide world. Think about that. The one true God thinks you're the it people. You are the most moral. You're the most true. You have the right rules. You are living the high life because you have the right God. Out of all the people, not the Egyptians who are richer than you, not the Babylonians who are smarter than you. And let me tell you something. That's insane. That is crazy. It is an advantage, but it is a crazy thought. Because there is no way you look at the Egyptians and say, I'm better than them. They are older than you are. They are smarter than you are. They are way richer than you are. And they have built things that are so old that are still the tallest thing you have ever seen. And then you go to Babylon, and that is crazy town. It's rich. It's fast. It's knowledgeable. It's smart. It's got towers. There is no way you go back home to dinky little, Samara and go, we're better than those people. No way. There's no evidence supporting that thought, except for monotheism, except that you have the right God, which is important because it allows you to survive in a world that people are constantly disappearing, being conquered, assimilated, destroyed, changing on their own. It grounds this Hebrew society. It is legitimacy for a small, poor, technologically behind people who cannot compete with Babylon or Egypt. They can't. There's just none. Go to your Kings, go to your Chronicles, go to the ending books of the Talmud, and bad things are constantly happening. The Egyptians show up with 20,000 chariots. It's over for Ahab. It's done. So, what monotheism does is makes you feel special in a world that tells you you're not special. What's the disadvantage? The disadvantage is if Yahweh gets mad, dude, you have problems. See Job. Now, Yahweh's not mad at Job. He just makes a deal with Lucifer. He makes a deal with Satan. But there's nobody to help you if this Yahweh gets mad. In polytheism, Poseidon is mad at Odysseus, but Athena will help him. If Yahweh is mad at you, dude, you got problems. Nobody is there to help you. Second, the rules never change. The 10 Commandments are still the 10 Commandments. But society changes. And, we talk a lot about the 10 Commandments. None of you follow them. Right? Honor thy mother and thy father. That means you do what they say without questioning it. You respect them so much that when they say take out the trash, you don't go, why? You just do it. You do it without them asking. That's how much you're supposed to honor your parents. And do you? No, not any teenager. Every teenager's talk back. Like every teenager goes to hell. Right? How about coveting? Coveting is to desire something. Well, that's capitalism, man. If you've ever seen someone's PlayStation 4 and you say, "Ooh, I like that," you have coveted. If you ever looked at a woman or a man walking down the street and go, "Ooh, that's hot," you have coveted. You break those rules all the time. All the time. I mean, have you gone to a football game? You're supposed to take the day of rest. You're supposed to take Sunday and it's God's day. How much time do you really spend thinking about God? Even religious people spend an hour, right? That leaves 23 hours of that day and at least 3 hours for football. And let's face it, it's really 9 hours because you have your 1 o'clock game, your 4 o'clock game, and your 7 o'clock game. And then you get your pizza with sausage on it, right? You get your hot dogs, and you're just breaking rules left and right. But that's a problem because societies change, but the rules never do. So as societies change, they get further and further and further away from the rules, which means you're constantly breaking them. Which means Yahweh is constantly mad at you. And that's not your fault. Society has changed. The rules don't. Which is my philosophical problem with people who cite the Bible to say gay people are bad. And it's like, they're like, well, it's in the Bible. It's like, yeah, there's a whole lot of other stuff in the Bible. Your unruly son, you could cut his tongue out. You could sell your daughter into slavery as a prostitute. We don't allow that. There's a lot of rules you don't follow. Those 40 rules about food, you follow almost none of them. Those 40 rules about sex, there's a lot that you're totally okay with. Some that you're not, but some you totally are. And so let's not be like this one thing in the Bible. God said so. God said a lot of things that you don't follow. I mean, if you're a Christian, it shouldn't matter anyway. That's the Hebrews book. Get yourself out of the Old Testament. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the light. The only way to God is through me. That's the new covenant. Where he said, treat people how you want to be treated. You don't want people telling you who to have sex with? Don't tell people who to have sex with. That's the rule now. From Jesus on, if you're a Christian. Sorry. Don't use the other people's book. But there's the problem, is the rules don't change. And picking one rule and saying this rule is correct, well, that's just BS, man. You can't say 99 rules are wrong, but one rule is right. It doesn't work that way. But anyway, so Yahweh gets mad, you got problems. Rules never change, which means you've got problems. And you need priests and literacy to know the rules. You need to be able to be literate to read this stuff. You need priests to explain it to you. Because you don't have time. As big as Talmudic studies is in Hebrew culture through all of history, 90% of people, 95% of people don't have time to know the intricacies. So they need someone to explain it to them. That's not their fault. That's the way ancient religions worked. You needed priests. But it means you need people to help you. You need literacy. If you want to know what's going on, you have to learn to read and write, which is not easy. It's expensive. You got to go to school for that. Most people in the ancient world can't read or write. They're not literate people. But here's a religion that says you can know what God wants if you can read and write. So there's an incentive from the very beginning to learn how to read and write. One's bar or bat mitzvah is in fact a test. Can you read? That's it. You go in, you say, I'm a man. And they're like, prove it. And you're like, great. Do I have to wrestle something or beat something or run faster than something. It's like, no, man. You have to do the hardest and most important thing of all. You've got to read Ezekiel. Or Ecclesiastes. One or the other. You go right ahead. And you go, well, that, in the modern world, you're like, what? Dude, everybody reads. In the ancient world, 25% of people might read in a literate society. So it was a big deal that you could read. But that's a disadvantage. It's not easy to do this religion. It's not open to other peoples to convert into, because you need the priests and you need literacy. All right, in our next episode, we're going to do Hebrew trauma. Because bad things are going to happen, man. Bad things. And we have to talk about how do the Hebrews survive all of the bad things that happen. So, good luck. I'll see you soon. Be safe. And thank you.